When you walk down Main Street in the small western slope town of Newcastle, there's no missing the pastel rainbow sign for the queer resource space. It's above a brick building right next to the library. Hi, I'm Benta.
Hi, I'm Ashley.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Ashley Stahl runs this space, which opened in March. She says this highly visible location is not an accident.
We want to make sure that we're a part of the community, that everyone knows we're here.
Inside, it's light and bright with plush couches and a big screen TV for video games and movie nights. Off to the side, there's a hair washing salon. A small room nearby will eventually be a space for free mental health counseling for queer youth.
Kind of as you go further into the space, we kind of have created a sort of, family basement or den type vibe is what we're going for, where everyone can kind of just relax and feel comfortable. We have a rainbow library of a whole bunch of books that are inclusive and affirming. We have Legos.
Stahl is wearing a shirt that reads, "Queer youth deserve a future." And she says they hope to soon set up a clothing swap and drop-in hours for youth to get homework help and socialize. She's a trans woman who transitioned in the last few years. She says it can be lonely.
It's hard to build community in rural areas for everyone. And when you're a minority group, it's going to be even harder to find people to connect with who have shared experiences and who have connections to all of the different things. Like, it's hard to get stuff. It's hard to find stuff. So it's really important to have some place or some person or somewhere to go when you're like, what do I do? I need all these different things and I've never, I don't know where to find them.
She says she really wants to help others not feel that same isolation, not just at her resource center in Newcastle, but across the state. She wants transgender people to know they matter, which is why Stahl said she accepted an invitation she recently got to go to the state capitol in Denver for Transgender Day of Visibility. She said she just didn't want to miss seeing people in this seat of power stand up for her community.
Frankly, it's a very scary time to be transgender, and so the moments like that are what kind of fill your cup a little bit and give you hope.
Senate Resolution 008 concerning the designation of March 31st, 2025 as Transgender Day of Visibility in Colorado and in connection therewith acknowledging the countless...
Stahl was one of the few guests on the Senate floor during the Day of Visibility resolution.
In Colorado, we believe in freedom, justice, and belonging for everyone.
Soon after, a Senate clerk read aloud the full text of the resolution.
And whereas visibility alone cannot guarantee safety or freedom, but it is a powerful tool to affirm humanity, resist erasure, and inspire collective action.
Some senators stood in recognition. Others didn't. That day at the State House, Stahl said having lawmakers set aside time for her community matters more than ever.
Even something as simple as making a statement and saying that we support this community and we celebrate you and we're there for you makes a difference for those who are able to get that message.
But Colorado lawmakers are doing more than sending a message this year. At a time when the federal government is rolling back rights and recognition for trans people, Colorado is poised to expand its protections in a number of areas.
There are Democratic bills on medical care, harassment, death certificates, and more. But each proposal comes with its own round of debate, as opponents argue Colorado is going too far on an issue that's proven to divide Americans. This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance, a show about Colorado politics, policy, and the 2025 state legislature. I'm Benta Birkeland.
And I'm Lucas Brady Woods with KUNC.
It's hard to overstate just how much federal policy towards trans people has changed under President Donald Trump in just a few months.
Right. On his first day in office, he signed an order removing federal recognition for any gender besides male and female. And his administration has gone after trans people serving in the military and playing on sports teams.
He's tried to restrict gender-affirming care for people under 19 years old, crack down on schools that support trans and non-binary students, and told federal agencies not to pursue civil rights cases on behalf of trans people.
But Colorado is a very different story. While the federal government is taking all this on, Democrats here are trying to push back and increase protections for trans people. We're seeing a lot of bills that deal with trans issues this year, maybe more than usual, but they aren't necessarily new ideas. Most of them build on other transgender protection laws passed in recent years.
Right, and it's important to note, starting out here, that Colorado has for a while included trans people in its major anti-discrimination laws. So you can't deny someone housing or a job because of their gender identity or expression. But Democratic lawmakers still see a lot of places where there needs to be specific protections. They see gaps, not just on discrimination, but also in areas like medical care.
Ultimately, passing this bill sends a powerful message. It says that Colorado values all its residents and are committed to protecting their access to necessary health care. It says that we see you, that we support you, and that we will do what we can to ensure you can live a full and healthy life.
Representative Brianna Titone is Colorado's only trans lawmaker, and her presence at the Capitol definitely helps humanize the issue for many of her colleagues.
The very reason it's so easy to mislead and the public against us is because we're a small minority, and we are intentionally misunderstood. We must not allow the hate mongers to win.
And as we mentioned, some of these bills aren't new ideas. They're essentially already in law or policy in Colorado, but Democrats are trying to make certain protections more firm. And on the other side of the aisle, Republicans, like Senator Lisa Frizzell, say the proposals go beyond equality to a sort of favoritism.
I think it's important when contemplating policies around this topic that words matter, and we need to ensure that we are not creating a special class of people that have rights and privileges above and beyond others.
In this episode, we're going to get into the specifics of what lawmakers are proposing this session and how the debates around these policies are playing out against the national backdrop.
Okay, let's get to the details of this legislation.
Let's start with probably the most ambitious proposal of the session, and we actually heard a little bit from the floor debate. We heard Titone talking about it, and this is her bill to protect access to gender-affirming care. And the big thing this bill would do is it says all health insurance plans must cover these treatments.
That's right. Currently, it's state health department policy to cover gender-affirming care, but this bill, if it passes, would put that into state law. That's especially important because it would then make the coverage requirement harder to reverse.
And I think we should mention here that the medical community does support this type of policy.
Right. So the American Academy of Pediatrics opposes laws that, quote, interfere with the doctor-patient relationship. Then the American Medical Association supports health insurance coverage for gender-affirming care. It says access to this kind of treatment is linked to reduced rates of depression, anxiety, and substance use among transgender people.
Lucas, you've been covering this bill and listened in on the committee hearing. How much of this is for Democrats to try to counter policies coming from the Trump administration?
Well, there's a little bit of both in here. The advocacy group One Colorado, which backed this legislation, says this bill isn't necessarily a reaction to the federal government's recent moves. They wanted this policy in law regardless, but at the same time, it would insulate the state a bit from moves made by the Trump administration, and supporters aren't exactly shying away from that part.
The bill recently passed the House, and I tuned in for that debate. It was definitely heated at times. Democrats did use procedural rules to limit how long the debate could go, and I think that certainly helped things, even though there was plenty of back and forth. A lot of Republicans question the need and the expense. Dusty Johnson is a freshman, and she's very focused on health care. She argued it's not fair to require gender-affirming care to be covered when insurance plans leave out a lot of other procedures. So she brought up examples like elective hysterectomies and cosmetic surgery for burn patients and said those are also cases where surgery can make people feel more comfortable in their bodies, but insurers don't necessarily have to cover them.
We should not be playing the doctor and saying what is medically fit for one is an elective for another. If we're going to open this up to taxpayer dollars, we need to do it equally to make sure we are affirming those who need the help most.
Republicans also tried to amend the bill so it wouldn't cover any gender-affirming medical care for those under 18. Here's Jarvis Caldwell from the House floor debate, and he's really focusing in on surgical treatments in particular.
And I often get told, well, we're not doing this. This isn't happening. We're not doing genital surgical procedures on children. We're not doing breast reductions on children for gender-affirming care. Okay, then explain to me why this includes children and why when we run an amendment that says you must exclude children from these procedures and these health benefit care plans, you voted down that amendment. If it's not happening, why is it in the bill?
So there's a lot of medical data out there showing that the number of minors getting gender-affirming surgeries is very, very small, but it does occur.
This is an issue that comes up over and over in these debates on bills like this, the question of how they deal specifically with transgender youth, not just the kind of medical care they can receive, things on parents' rights and how the government treats them overall.
And that's certainly true for another bill that's also passed the House that I've been keeping an eye on. This is House Bill 1312, and it includes a slew of protections for trans parents and children in family court. Specifically, it wouldn't let a judge base their custody decisions on the fact that one parent is trans or if a parent supports allowing their child to transition.
Now, this seems like it could be difficult to enforce, certainly a thorny issue. I mean, I'm picturing two parents in the middle of a divorce. They disagree about whether or not to let their child transition or take any gender-affirming care. How does the court not end up giving one or the other some type of upper hand?
Yeah, this seems like one of those sticky places with this issue where that tension we talked about between fighting for this community's rights and worrying about potential backlash really shows itself. For example, some opponents worry it could give preferential treatment to parents who support gender-affirming care in a custody dispute.
Definitely a delicate issue, and I think like a lot of things with family court and custody, so many different components. And that bill that you're referencing goes beyond the walls of family court, though, because there's another provision to require school dress codes to be gender neutral. And as part of that, it also requires gender-neutral parental notification policies. So these are requirements some districts may have if a student wants to have a non-legal name change, wants to be called by a different name at school. This bill says, look, if you have a school policy on that, it has to apply to every type of gender of student.
So these proposals are the two big trans rights bills this session. But Democrats are really coming at protecting trans Coloradans from a number of different angles across multiple additional bills. They're looking at making intentionally misgendering or, quote, dead naming someone a specific form of discrimination and harassment, for example.
If people aren't familiar with the term dead naming, that's when someone deliberately calls a transgender person by the name they used prior to transitioning. Sponsors of this bill said it's really supposed to capture something that's habitual and intentional and trying to inflict distress, so it's not someone making a mistake. And reiterating again that Colorado's anti-discrimination law does already protect trans people in public accommodations, so things like housing and employment. Specifically, our law includes discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression.
Right. Colorado has some pretty solid protections in place, especially compared to other states already. But just to round up our list of Democratic proposals, they're also trying to ensure that death certificates accurately reflect one's gender or gender identity. And they're trying to strengthen protections for parents or others who help trans youth get medical care in Colorado if they live in states that don't allow it.
Lucas, a wide variety of bills and policies here. Do you see any general themes with what Democrats are trying to do?
Definitely. On a basic level, they're trying to shore up as many protections as possible and build up the defenses in Colorado against efforts to undermine them from the federal government, right? And they're not just doing it for the transgender community. It's also similar to work they're doing to protect immigrant rights and reproductive health care.
And of course, Democrats are not the only ones running bills on transgender issues this session. They have a wide majority in both chambers, so theirs are more likely to pass. But Republicans have their own proposals. There was a bill that would have made it trafficking to bring a minor to Colorado for gender-affirming care. And another bill could have made it harder for medical providers who provide gender-affirming care to get malpractice insurance.
I mean, these run completely counter to the work that Democrats are doing. So it's fair to say that these are not going to pass, like you mentioned. It is kind of interesting, though. There aren't any bills this year on a couple of topics that have been pretty perennial. Things like restricting which bathrooms trans youth can use or which sports teams they can play on.
This year's bills have been more focused on gender-affirming care for youth. That's an issue a lot of conservative lawmakers feel deeply opposed to, and they're kind of unified on that. Even if a bill only gets one public hearing, introducing a bill on this topic means it can be aired out publicly, people can testify. It's a chance for lawmakers to get people's votes on the record, because every bill that's introduced in Colorado has to have at least one public hearing and an up or down vote.
Yeah. This is particularly relevant right now because there's also a lot of debate over whether Democrats' support for trans rights has gone beyond what the general public agrees with. And that's something we'll talk about next.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance. As we've been talking about, protecting trans rights is a top priority for Colorado Democrats. But it was also an issue Trump and conservatives really leaned into in the last election.
And there was that famous attack ad against Kamala Harris, where the Trump campaign went after Harris for remarks she'd made about supporting trans rights.
Kamala's agenda is they, them, not you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
There's definitely a sense that this was a successful attack for the Trump campaign, that they managed to tap into a feeling among some voters that Democrats are focusing too much on this issue.
And this is something we hear locally, too, in Colorado. Republicans I've spoken with say the legislature shouldn't be spending a lot of time on this issue. And I do think they feel somewhat emboldened by the election, especially when it comes to things like banning trans women from women's sports. Republicans also say, and polls bear this out, that more Americans agree with them on things like trans youth in sports. I saw a poll from the Pew Research Center that said 2/3 of people in the U.S. think people should have to compete under the gender they were assigned at birth.
And this puts Democrats in a difficult position, right? I think a lot of them genuinely believe in the importance of expanding trans rights and protections. But especially for their members in more moderate or vulnerable districts, the more bills they run and the more time they spend on these issues, the more they're opening themselves up to being attacked as out of touch.
I mean, so far, we're not seeing public divisions among Democrats. I'm not hearing from Democrats that they shouldn't be running these bills, and I don't think it's slowed things down for Democrats, looking at the number of policies we're seeing this year. And as we have pointed out, most of what Democrats are looking at includes strengthening what already essentially exists. They're not bringing in some new, really unusual thing that people are vehemently opposed to.
And in recent years, there have been very few issues at the State House that can be as politically fraught as trans rights legislation. You know, the two sides are just so far apart on how they view these issues and talk about these issues and trans people. And it's been a topic that has really tested the legislature's rules on decorum and civility.
It's definitely not as bad in Colorado as Washington, D.C. That goes for a host of issues, but for this specifically, the first trans congresswoman in D.C., she's regularly misgendered by her Republican colleagues. There are some Colorado lawmakers who've talked about trans people as being mentally ill or that the gay community is a cult, but you also have Republicans who don't talk like that. And they say they feel like Democrats sometimes demonize them for opposing some of these bills for any reason. And I'm thinking of Representative Ron Weinberg here. He was particularly upset on the healthcare trans debate to hear opposition to trans rights being compared to Nazi ideology.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Fellow colleagues, I had absolutely no intention to speak on this today because I understand what you're trying to do, but to be told that I'm either white nationalists or impugn Republicans, talk about Nazi Germany, which is literally what my whole family went through during World War II, what are you doing?
This really stood out to me because Weinberg First, he's the legislature's only Jewish Republican member. And he's worked closely with the state's only trans lawmaker, Brianna Titone, on several bills. And so they're pretty good colleagues.
This brings up another important point, that having Titone at the legislature has really changed how these debates unfold, I think. Now there's a trans person in the room every time they debate trans issues.
I think that does make an impact. I mean, when you have someone from that community in the chamber. And for herself, Titone has said she's had to walk this fine line through her time in the legislature. So she's in her final term. She hasn't shied away from standing up for trans people and working on bills, but that doesn't mean she's going to be the lead sponsor on every single trans bill. She's got a lot of other issues she's focused on, a lot of business and economic issues, right to repair legislation. She worked on that with Weinberg. So, it's not her sole focus at the Capitol.
I mean, for lack of a better term, she is into some nerdy issues most of the time, I think.
Fair point.
And passionate about them.
Anyone who wants to run for state treasurer has to have some of that in them.
Exactly. And I think now that she is running for state treasurer and she's term limited, as you said, it'll be interesting to see if anything changes after 2026. It might be a while before we have another trans person serving in the legislature.
We've talked a lot about what Colorado Democrats are doing on trans issues this year and whether they're putting more attention on the issue than voters want. But there's potentially more immediate repercussions for Colorado.
Yes. President Trump has shown that he's very eager to punish any entity that tries to go against his administration's policies. He managed to get hospitals to immediately halt gender-affirming care for youth by tying it to Medicaid funding. He's investigating schools for their bathroom and sports policies. You hear a lot of warnings in the State House from Republicans who say, okay, if you pass these laws, what could the federal government do in return?
And it doesn't just come up with these big policies. Even in the opposition to the death certificate bill, and that's the bill that would make sure death certificates conform to a person's gender identity. One Republican said essentially, we are just begging the federal government to take our money away. Like, why are we provoking them with this bill?
I mean, it's a real consideration, especially when the state budget is already so strained, as we've talked about a lot before.
And I mentioned this to Ashley Stull when we were in the queer resource space in Newcastle. And she said she is worried about the federal money issue.
If they're going to cut the source of money, it makes it really hard decisions for people, even people who want to support this community, because you want to support the LGBTQ plus community. But by doing that, if it's going to mean you can't support a bunch of other people who need help, that's a really hard decision to make. And I hope that we will have people who are willing to stand up and fight as much as they can on that, because that's going to be what is required to prevent it from happening.
So we've talked about this as a matter of politics and policy, but the people I spoke with in the LGBTQ plus community say this isn't something you can be so calculated about. I mean, these protections, they say, can be life-saving for some people. Just last fall, the CDC found that more than half of transgender high school students had considered suicide in the past year.
Wow, that's a high number.
Yeah. And it makes me think of something else that Stahl said, that trans kids need to see their lawmakers standing up for them because it could keep them alive. It gives them a sense that a future is possible for them in this state.
That gets to the fundamental question that both backers and opponents have to consider with these policies. Are they making a material difference in people's lives, or moving Colorado out of step with the wider population and possibly putting a big federal target on the state? That's it for this episode. Purplish is a production of member-supported Colorado Public Radio and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.
The CCNA is a collaboration between KUNC News, Colorado Public Radio, Rocky Mountain PBS, and the Colorado Sun, with support from news outlets throughout the state. Funding for the Alliance is provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm Lucas Brady Woods.
And I'm Benta Berglund. Our producer is Stephanie Wolf. This episode was edited by Megan Verlee and sound designed and engineered by Shane Rumsey. Our theme music is by Brad Turner.
Purplish will be back in your feeds next week. Subscribe now so you don't miss an episode.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.